This guy sounds like he's a TikToker. he must be getting all his information from TikTok. I created Species Nutrition with one mission in mind: to provide bodybuilders and serious athletes with no-nonsense supplements that work. I put my name and reputation on every bottle of Species Nutrition products. If you want to be your absolute best, join the evolution.
Alright, television, RxMuscle.com. This is Ask Dave, your 30-minute question and answer show with Dave Palumbo. I'm your host, Sadiq Faruqi. So glad you can join us on this 31st day of January, just over 4 weeks out from the Arnold Classic. In just a matter of 4 weeks, Dave Palumbo and I, as well as Chris Aceto, will be in Columbus, Ohio to bring you wall-to-wall coverage of the Arnold Classic. And beginning next week, we'll begin our coverage, our preview coverage of all things related to the Arnold Classic. We're going to go right into the questions. The first two questions on the show, of course, from the Dave Palumbo Experience app. First question, kind of a reiteration of a 90s era versus today kind of a thing as far as why bodybuilders look the way that they did back in the day as compared to now. His a specific comparison is between Chris Bumstead and Arnold Schwarzenegger. Those are the pictures that I guess he posted on the app in, comparing as far as back in Arnold's day, why the physiques looked the way that they did and why they don't look the way that they do now. And I guess the comparison was, again, Arnold and Bumstead. So your opinion as far as why bodybuilders looked one way back then and looked a certain way today?
I've been seeing a lot of pictures of the people putting pictures of Bumstead versus Arnold, which is really not fair to Arnold because technology has changed a lot, and knowledge of diet and training and, the drugs are different. There was really no growth hormone back when Arnold was competing, and the dosages they used were much less. And, there was no machines. There was all free weights. And so I think the physiques were a little more rugged looking. They weren't as big and developed, and they didn't have the conditioning that they have today. And I think the reason they didn't have the conditioning is that no one really rewarded that. It wasn't like you didn't need striated glutes. No one had them really, Zane probably looked as good and did as well as he did at the low body weight he was at because his conditioning was just supreme over a lot of these guys. So, it's what's in style. It's like, how do you judge the styles of the 1920s versus the styles of today, 100 years later, when, those styles in the 20s were cool for the 20s, and now in 2022 or 2024, they're just not anymore. So you really can't compare eras. In Arnold's era, he was the best of the best. No one was even close to him. In today's era, in classic physique, Bumstead's the best, and no one's close to him. And that's just the way it is. And so we can say, yeah, the training was different. Arnold and those guys, they overtrained like crazy back in the day. They would train 6 hours a day, and they thought the more was better. They ate pretty good. They were like a more low carb guys back then. They were high protein, high fat, but they didn't really know the difference. They ate a lot of saturated fats. They didn't really know that much about, nutrition. The supplementation was terrible back then. There was no nutritional supplements worth their weight in gold. Believe me, it was all junk. And, the anabolics were pretty much the same, but no one used high dosages, even though everything was real because people would go to the pharmacy and pick it up. But so, and that's only because no one knew any better. That's just what they were doing, what everyone else was doing. So it's unfair to compare the two eras because Arnold was the king back in his day and Bumstead's king now. It's like trying to say, how would Mike Tyson have done against, Muhammad Ali if they ever fought in their prime? You don't know, because until they get up there on stage and into that ring and box each other, it's an impossibility to compare the two. So I don't like when I see those comparisons. It's a little different when you show like Bumstead versus Derek Lunsford, for instance, because these guys are competing in the same era with the same technology, the same knowledge. That's more of an appropriate, like, well, how would Bumstead have done in the open class? I think that's more appropriate than trying to compare someone to 40 years ago. It's just not, there's just no comparison there.
Second question, again, these questions from the Dave Palumbo Experience app. I have very stubborn fat on my lower back obliques. I can get leaner with dieting hard, but muscle is always sacrificed to reach that level. I was reading about fat dissolving injections that contain deoxycholic acid. Do you have any experience with these, and are there any side effects? Now, beyond that, liposuction will be extreme since I don't have a lot of fat, and it's also very expensive.
Yeah, there's really no good technology out there to inject something into an area and burn fat or incinerate fat. I know that I've seen some of these preparations and I've seen some of the research, and you know what? I've seen people have had it done. To me, for the cost of it, it just doesn't seem like it's worth it. I don't think that there's any significance. Dr. Blau, who's a very dear friend of mine, he's also the #1 gynecomastia surgery in the world out of White Plains, New York, sponsor of our website. Once again, very dear family friend now for many, many years. When I asked him about a lot of these injections and lasers they're using now, and he said, Dave, he goes, the problem is, he's a sculptor by trade, and he's a great artist. In order to be a good artist, you have to know where to take out the fat and where not to take the fat out, because you're creating an artistic look to the person's body. When you're injecting this stuff into the fat and hoping it incinerates the fat, you never know where it's going to disappear from. He's like, so you're not getting a very accurate, result, and you're getting inconsistent results. Sometimes you get good results, sometimes you don't, sometimes it's uneven. It's impossible to predict how those things are going to work, those injections. And the lasers too. So by putting a liposuction wand in under the skin, you're making a tiny little needle prick, incision. You can very, very accurately suck out what you want, and you can see how it looks after you suck it out. So if a person has a trouble area that, literally, and they've exhausted every other option, they cannot get rid of that area of body fat, I would recommend getting a little localized liposuction, but I would try to get as lean as possible first, so that you know where the trouble area is. Otherwise, you can't get liposuction when you have a lot of fat in your body, because it's just, you can't suck everything out. And I think if you do that, that's a more reasonable approach. Personally, I think you can get rid of fat from everywhere if you diet hard enough with the right strategy. Assuming that you can't, and I'm wrong, then I think liposuction is the next best thing. And you know what? If you do it once, you're done. That's it. Yeah, it might be a little bit expensive, but you know what? If you can't afford it, you shouldn't do it at all. Don't try to do things that are going to do things halfway or half-assed, because then you're going to be unhappy with the results, and you're going to wind up having to do the liposuction anyway. So you might as well do it right the first time. By the way, these questions are from the Dave Palumbo Experience app. It's an app I have online. You can download it on your Android phone or on your iTunes on your Apple phone. It's $29 a month. You get me as a coach in the back pocket. All my videos I've ever done, all my writings I've ever done are right in one place. You can ask questions in an open forum, so everyone sees everyone's questions and everyone's answers. I answer them all. Also, I take the best questions and I do a Q&A video every single week on the app. We also put up a workout every single week on that app. It's a lot of value. It's great for continuing education. It's a write-off if you're a coach, as an expense for education and continuing education. And you know what? It's a constant learning experience. So check it out. I appreciate everyone out there who supports that app. We have a lot of members, and thank you for asking some great questions.
Let's go to our Facebook and Instagram questions. If you're not already following us on Facebook, just go into the search bar, type in RxMuscle. On Instagram, official_RxMuscle. Let's go to Mike Molinaro. I'm running T3 to facilitate a caloric deficit and lose some pounds like I've done in the past. Have you ever heard of a correlation between T3 and elevated white blood cell count?
Not really. There's no direct correlation. Anytime you get a little sick, anytime you get any kind of inflammatory process in your body, a lot of times you're going to see white blood cells go up. And you know what? A lot of times people send me blood work and they're like, what do you think? My white blood cells are high or my white blood cells are low sometimes. And usually in most cases where people send me that, it's like a point or two high or low. That's not significant because these values change all throughout the day. If you see a super, super high value or a super, super low value, that's something to take note of. But a little bit of an elevation here or there in any of your blood work, parameters, I wouldn't get too bent out of shape over. It's funny because I always question my doctors because I'm a neurotic, right, about everything. And most of the time they're like, and I've been in the hospital, I've questioned the doctors, they're like, this is not significant. They're like, it has to be really high or really low. We don't get all bent out of shape on slight lab values that are a little high or a little low. And it puts it in perspective. If you had high white blood cells with low red blood cells, then that might mean that the white blood cells are overrunning the red blood cells, different story. But if you have, in most bodybuilders' case, you have high red blood cells and you have some high white blood cells, you probably have some sort of a inflammatory or infectious process going on in your body. And that's par for the course a lot of times, and you don't even know it. I mean, you could take a bad shot and have a slight little inflammatory infection that's hasn't developed into an infection, but your immune system is going after it, and that will elevate white blood cells. So don't get so worried about that.
Let's go to Alan Minch. Good one here. Obviously, we do get a lot of questions about dieting, about off-season, about pre-contest, but this one is sort of what happens after you're done dieting for a contest and stay on track. So says, look, dieting for a show is easy. It's structured. However, once a show is done and that structure is gone, I find dieting for a gain or even maintenance to be much more difficult. I know it comes down to desire and willpower, but are there any tricks you use or tips you have to help your clients stay on track for their, quote, off-seasons?
I always get more motivated in the off-season because I'm like, you know what? When you diet for a very long time for a show, yeah, you look great, and you look in the mirror and you're like, I'm ripped and everything like that. But I always see myself and say, you know what, man, I need more back, or I need more of this, or I need more of that. And it's almost like at that point, I'm so sick of dieting, I can't wait to get into the off season to structure my meals and have all this extra food and be able to train heavier because I'm going to be stronger. So I'm just as motivated, off season as I am pre-contest. That's always been the way I was. So when the show would be over, I'd eat like a lunatic for a few days. And then I'm back in the gym and I'm like, man, I'm going to grow now. I'm going to have a good rebound off of the show. I'll stay off for, whatever, 6 to 8 weeks. And then I'll get back on and I'm going to really, so I was always motivating myself because I wanted to improve. I think a lot of guys, they get into the off season and they get like depressed because maybe they're not getting as much attention, or maybe they don't think, I lost all my abs and I'm not as ripped. And maybe people are not, looking at me with the same, like envy anymore. And it becomes almost like an ego thing. And then they start getting bored and they don't have anything to shoot for. But you know what? Most guys mess up. I was going to say F up, but mess up because they lose their enthusiasm in the off season and they don't make the gains that they should. I can't tell you how many bodybuilders I've watched interviews with, and I was the same way. It's like the next day they want to go to the gym and start improving for next season already, because that's what we do as bodybuilders. We get in the best shape of our life, we compete, and then we like, all right, we know what we got to work on. We know what doesn't look good. I can't wait to get back in that gym and do that. If you don't have that kind of enthusiasm and you can't follow a diet in the off season and you can't stick to your whatever it is, 6 to 8 meals you're eating a day and shakes, then you know what? You really don't love bodybuilding that much. And maybe it's not really for you. Maybe you're just doing it for the attention, or maybe you're just doing it because you like being in shape and people, look up to you at that point. That's not a good reason to be a competitive bodybuilder. Okay. It's okay, but it's not a good reason. I can't tell you how many people blow the whole off season. They gain 2 or 3 pounds of muscle when they could be gaining 10 or 15 pounds, all because they can't stay focused and concentrate on the goal, which is to get better in the off season, to put more muscle on, increase muscle maturity, develop new techniques in terms of training to be able to increase intensity and to get yourself out of that plateau and to the next level. And that's exciting because now you have energy. You're not starving all the time. You actually can focus on, hey, what do I need to do to improve? You might want to hire someone, a trainer or someone like myself, to critique you and say, hey, this is you need to work on this, this, and this. And you know what? Here's the list of exercises you should do. And you know what? Send me some videos so I can see how you're training to make sure you're executing these movements properly. That's what you might need. You just might need, and I tell people this all the time. A lot of guys contact me for contest prep, and then in the off season they disappear because they figure, well, you know, it's not the same. Dave doesn't have to make a million changes in the off season, but if people don't have someone to check in with and they don't have accountability, a lot of times they're off the reservation and they're just not doing what they should be doing. But if you have to check in with me twice a week and I'm going to see that you're not making progress, if things are going wrong, they know I'm going to give them a mouthful and tell them, you know, what they should be doing. So some people need that accountability. If you're one of them, then sign up with someone so that you can have accountability and send updates to them so that you know that, you know what, I'm going to be scored. Almost like you're getting a test every week in school. I got to make sure I'm ready for the test. And that's going to mean you're going to eat all your meals, you're going to take all your nutritional supplements, and you're not going to miss any workouts. And it's that simple. That's what bodybuilding is about.
Let's go to Pete Pingle. Your favorite bodybuilding magazine back in the day, and I would say as you were getting into bodybuilding, because you know usually those are the things that excite you and really motivate you to get into bodybuilding.
I'll be completely honest here because you know, obviously you know my relationship with Steve Blackman and Muscular Development, and you know how it ended like on a little bit of a sour note. But coming up, okay, when I was in the mid '90s, early '90s, I loved Bill Phillips' Muscle Media. He started it in the early '90s, and I was a total disciple of his. I mean, I knew every word he ever wrote about anabolics, supplements. I couldn't wait for that magazine, Muscle Media 2000, to come every single week, every single month, and I read it from cover to cover. Now I read all the other magazines too, but that was my favorite because they actually gave real information on diet and nutritional supplements and performance enhancing drugs. None of the other magazines did that. When we got to about the year 2000, so that was like probably 92 through 2000. When we got to the year 2000, that's when Steve Blackman decided he was going to make muscular development hardcore. And he hired me to write for the magazine at that point. At that point in time, and Bill Phillips, I think he either had sold or was just about to sell. So the magazine really just became, there was no more drug information in there or anything like that anymore. It kind of got softer. And then it just was disbanded once he sold the company. At 2000 on, Blackman, by and far, Muscular Development blew every magazine away until probably, you know, magazines became irrelevant, which was probably around, you know, 2009, 10, you know, when I left there. Pretty much people weren't reading magazines anymore. But for that 10 years, MD just destroyed everyone because they had real articles in there, real training regimens, you know, the best pictures and the best information on anabolics, nutritional supplements, and diet. And Blackman was king, you know, for 10 years in that respect, and as far as I'm concerned. And I don't think any of the other magazines were close. You know, Flex always had nice pictures in there and good contest reports because Peter McGuff wrote those. And, you know, Muscle Mag was always like a little bit of a gossipy like type of, you know, magazine. So they had some stuff that, you know, that was interesting to read in there. But you know, there was no real good drug information in there. They had a couple occasional articles by Will Brink or something like that. And then Iron Man magazine, you know, they had their own unique style in terms of the pictures, but I never really got into the articles in that magazine. I thought Balick did a good job with the photography of that magazine, and that really was it. I think Jeff Everson had that Planet Muscle for a while, which was kind of like it was like a porn magazine or something like that. Really, it wasn't, to me. There was no real information in there. Even when I wrote for it, they used to water down my articles, and so I think MD was probably, if I had to evaluate over the course of time, I'd say Muscle Media, MD, two best magazines.
Let's go to Chad Schultz or Schultz, insulin-related question. If you're taking insulin to help absorb nutrients and control blood sugar throughout the day, is this something you shouldn't do every day or rotate every other week? What do you recommend?
No, if you're having fasting blood sugar problems where you're high in the morning, you know, when you're waking up, you should stay on this. Now, now a lot of times, some people's blood sugar issues start when they start taking growth hormone. So for those people, they might want to just do the long-acting insulin while they're on the GH. If they stop growth hormone, stop the insulin, see if your blood sugars go back to normal. If you're waking up under 90 fastings without the GH, then you don't need the insulin. Insulin is a tool. And I think this is where people get it wrong. Too many people always think that insulin is a muscle building steroid. Like we're going to take insulin and we're going to grow more because we're doing insulin. That's only the case if you don't have enough insulin. Okay, if your body is producing enough insulin already, taking more insulin will more than likely make you fat. And we see a lot of bodybuilders out there. We know who they are. And you guys who have tried it know who you are. You take insulin and you get bloated and fat. That's all. You might get a little stronger because of all the fluid you're holding. And then there's guys who take insulin and they grow like a weed because they don't produce enough. And once you restore the right amount to their bodies, now all of a sudden they're absorbing their food at maximum efficiency. That was my problem. I was taking like 3-4 IUs of GH a day. I probably didn't produce a lot of insulin to begin with, which is why I was so lean all the time. And I was eating massive amounts of food, 10, 12 times a day. God knows how many, probably was, 8 to 10,000 calories a day I was eating. I was probably eating, 1,000 grams of carbs a day at some points. And so I couldn't produce enough insulin. So I was probably running high blood sugars. I never tested my blood sugar. I didn't know. My fastings were a little high, but nothing crazy. But I was young too. But as soon as I started taking Humulin R, which was the regular insulin, it was like a semi-fast acting. You would get a peak initially, and then 2 hours later you get another peak. I was doing that twice a day for a while in the off season, and I was growing like a weed. And I wasn't getting fatter. I was holding maybe a little bit of water from it, but I was growing. And that just told me that, you know what, I wasn't absorbing my food. And when I added it in, I started, absorbing all my food and growing better. I had friends of mine who wanted to know what I did. I told them what I did. They did it and they got fat from it. So insulin is not a one size fits all. It really depends on what your blood sugars are, how your body's responding to what's going on, and evaluating on an individual by individual basis what each person needs. And if you just try to knee-jerk template it all and give every person the same protocol, it's not going to work for insulin. It'll work for anabolics, but it's not going to work for insulin.
Let's go to Andrew Apuzzo. I'm not sure if I asked you this question last week. Stop me if I did. For someone that has no aspirations of competing, would there be any benefit to learn and practice posing?
I don't think that posing could be a bad thing for anyone. I mean, it gives you good body awareness, body control of the muscles. And think about it. When you flex, okay, and you can feel yourself, moving, gracefully and hitting poses, you're creating a mind-muscle connection. And, what I just did like that, I could never do that when I first started. I was very mechanical and rigid, and because my nerve pathways hadn't been built up between my brain and my muscles. And I think guys that grow really fast sometimes have that coordination problem too, because there's so much muscle that the nerve pathways haven't had time to catch up. So it took me a long time to get that smooth move, in posing. And that only came with practice. And I learned how to pose better when I started teaching other people how to pose, because then I wasn't so preoccupied with myself. I was more interested in teaching them, and I realized that I was slowing things down, and I actually understood it better. It's like sometimes like when I teach my guru course, which by the way, I think I'm going to be teaching on February 24th, the next course. If you guys want to sign up, we'll have a poster up pretty soon. When I teach the guru course, as soon as I'm done, all the stuff I talked about between diet, supplementation, drugs, it all becomes like solidified again in my brain. Even though I knew it all, by repeating myself and talking about it again, it makes me know it even better. So every time I teach that course, I become even better at what I'm doing because I'm repetitively doing things. That's my son's always complaining. He's like, Mama, why do I have to write the spelling words 2 times? Why? Because the more you write the word, the better chance you are to remember how to spell the word, right? And what the word is and what it means. So we learn by repetition. I think it would be great to pose and practice the poses and learn how to, coordinate that, because you're going to have a better muscle control. And then when you get on the exercises like, leg curls or leg extensions, you're going to feel the muscle that much more.
Let's go to Bilal Hamide. Let me see this question. Competition coming up. Whenever I'm trying to hit the abs and thighs, my abs just look horrible genetically, even though I'm very lean. What are some variations you could recommend?
For which exercise?
No. When he hits an abs and thighs, says it looks bad. I guess just genetic, it just looks bad. He's very lean. So he wants to know, I guess, what variations you would suggest.
Some people look better when they hit like Bumstead looks better when he's in a vacuum on the ab pose, which is really not an ab pose. It's really a vacuum pose. Because when he locks down it doesn't look that it doesn't really look any better. So, you got to really see what works for you. Some guys will hit it a little bit more from the side, they try to bring some obliques in. But the bottom line is that most people hit the ab pose wrong, because what they do is when they hit the pose, they suck their stomach in because they're afraid it's going to stick out and not look good. And when you suck in that transverse abdominis muscles, it creases the abs, and it doesn't allow the rectus muscles to kind of line up with each other, because it's being puckered in, it's being pulled in. So you get this almost like involution look to the abs, and everyone, and you see the pictures, you're like, where the hell are my abs? Where'd they go? I don't have abs. The trick is when you hit the ab shot to blow your air out and push the abs out, almost like you're going to the bathroom, doing a Valsalva maneuver. By pushing out on the abs, it allows the transverse abdominis muscles, which are underneath, the ones that suck your stomach in, to relax. And then the rectus muscles, which are in the front, can line up in that little box-like, configuration, which is what we're looking for. So the ab pose is a relaxed pose in the sense that you're pushing the abs out, blowing out your air, letting the abs shorten on each other and line up with each other. And assuming you're in shape and there's no fat there, it's going to look good. If for some reason your abs kind of can balloon out a little bit, once you're in the pose, then you can pull your stomach in a little bit, but not prior to hitting the pose, because if you do that, the abs will never line up. And it's a very, very common mistake that people make. They don't allow the abs to contract properly and line up with each other before they start moving around. And a lot of women do that too, because they're very self-conscious, because you're always being told, suck your stomach in, don't let it hang out. Well, you can't suck it in. You got to blow out your abs first, then suck it in if you have to. So don't suck it in first, or once again, you create that crease and it doesn't allow the abs to line up. That's all. Once again, practice makes perfect on that. You got to get in the mirror and you just play around with it over and over and over again. And it's unnatural to let your stomach push out, because you want to say, I got to pull it in. I got to pull it in. But if you don't let it, relax it and just blow down on it and let it come out, you're never going to get the abs to line up properly.
Let's take a cardio-related question. It's from David Jaworski. Does an hour at 140 heart rate on the elliptical burn the same amount of calories as an hour of running the exact same heart rate? Holding that heart rate on the elliptical is very hard, while running, by comparison, in his opinion, is much easier.
I'm gonna answer the question with a question. Is it more important to burn calories, or is it more important to burn fat? Now, if you were an endurance athlete, you might say calories, because you're going to be running at a higher intensity level, right? If you're a bodybuilder or someone who's competing in a physique competition, which I'm sure probably 99% of the people watching this are probably physique athletes and they want to just look good, right? It's not about calories. It's about burning stored body fat. And if the intensity level is too high, okay, the body cannot generate ATP, energy, by oxidizing fat properly fast enough, because fat oxidation is a slow, sustained process. When you need rapid energy quickly, your body must use carbohydrates as a fuel source. You don't produce as many ATP, but you produce it a lot faster. So if you're running, okay, you're not really using stored body fat. As a matter of fact, you can look at some female endurance athletes, and a lot of them, or look at the aerobics instructors, there's a lot of very overweight, people that are doing, teaching 8 classes of aerobics a day. How is that possible? They're burning 20,000 calories a day, and yet they're overweight. There's no way they're eating that much food, right? Well, the problem is because they're not burning stored body fat. They're burning carbs as a fuel source. And in the absence of carbs, they'll burn muscle. They'll turn the muscles into the protein in the muscle, to turn that into carbs. But what invariably happens is you get these, especially these aerobics instructors that teach all day long, they're just shoveling carbs in their mouth because they're starving all the time, because that's the only fuel source that their body can use. If you walk on a treadmill at 3.6 miles per hour, you're burning all fat, because it's a slow, sustained, steady state movement. Once you get too high, once the intensity gets too high, fat can't be used as fuel anymore. You start using carbs. So how many calories you burn on the elliptical versus the treadmill is irrelevant. The calories mean nothing. It's which calories are you burning? Are you burning carb calories? Or are you burning fat calories? I'm assuming you want to burn fat. That means you have to stay in a lower training zone, but you might have to do it a little bit longer. So instead of doing 20 minutes on a stepper, you might have to do 40 minutes or 35 minutes on a bike or walking on a treadmill. But that's a big mistake a lot of people make, and they don't understand. They confuse calories with fat burning. They think the more calories I burn, the more fat I'm burning. That is not the case, and that is the problem and it explains it's the perfect reason why you can't equate cardio with how much fat you burn, because it's what kind of calories your body is using during the fat burning process.
Let's go to Isa. Heard that combining test with EQ is nonsense, since EQ is a test derivative and acts the same as test. And the smart move, I guess, as he's heard, would be taking either a 19 NOR or a DHT with test. Your take.
This guy sounds like he's a TikToker. he must be getting all his information from TikTok. He wants to combine it with a DHTer. What's a DHTer? Is that a DHT derived anabolic steroid that has nothing to do with DHT anymore, but that they made from DHT? Or, I find it very, very funny, where people, glean their information from these days. Unfortunately, it's mostly, especially with young people, it's mostly from TikTok, which is, you have the biggest bunch of morons on that platform that are, these are guys that did one cycle and now they're steroid gurus. The best cycles are the long-acting injectables, combining testosterone with a long-acting, anabolic. We've talked about this before, whether it be combining testosterone with equipoise, or testosterone with DECA, or testosterone with dianabol, or testosterone with trenbolone. Those combinations yield the best muscle-building results. And they tend to have the least amount of side effects if you're using long-acting esters. Obviously, trenbolone and anthate would be better than the trenbolone acetate, which is fast-acting. Less toxicity too in that sense. But equipoise and DECA are pretty comparable to each other in strength. And when combined with testosterone, they make really good muscle building combinations because, number one, they don't kill your appetite. If anything, they open up your appetite. They make you hungry. They're very long acting. There's no toxicity associated with them. They break down real easy in the liver over a long period of time. You don't have to inject them as frequently. And those are the two go-tos as far as I'm concerned. If you're looking for something with the least side effects, test EQ, test DECA are probably your best bets. Once you start getting into trenbolone, obviously trenbolone is very high in androgens. It can raise your anxiety level. It can cause increased blood pressure, which could put stress on the kidneys. So that's a little bit more toxic. Dianabol mostly comes as an oral, so then you have the oral toxicity. Even if you get injectable dianabol, a lot of times it raises blood pressure a little high, but the injectable D-bol I would say is probably pretty safe. If you get into drugs like Anadrol, those are orals and they're very, very toxic to the liver. That's something you probably want to avoid. NPP, which is like baby DECA, just is a short-acting compound. It doesn't really have the anti-inflammatory effects that DECA have. So in my book, it's not even worth using it. Masteron is good, but it's more of like an anabolic you use, when you're dieting. But I have some people use it off season. It's kind of like a tweener. You can kind of go both ways with that. And then you have your Winstrol, Anavar, Primavol. Those are kind of weaker drugs for men. Mostly women use those drugs, but you can use those in conjunction with a lot of other stuff during contest prep. So, and that's the whole gamut, really. I mean, I don't think we missed anything. That's pretty much, what there is out there. So I don't know why every once in a while I'll hear DECA is no good or EQ is no good or it does this or does that. We've been using these drugs, for 50 years, okay? And they're the basis of 99% of all the mass you see on bodybuilders on stage come from test, DECA, and equipoise. And that's just a fact. And now trenbolone these days, obviously. So I don't know where some of this information comes from, but you guys, you got to be very careful who you're listening to. I know it's tempting as a young man to want to listen to another young guy because you think you're on the same wavelength. But the truth is, when you're in school and you're in college and you're learning, you're not learning from guys the same age as you. You're learning from older people who have experience, people who've gone through the education process, who've been teaching for years and years, who have insights that you guys have not even dreamt of yet. And that's the best people those should be your mentors, the people that have done the work already. People like myself, and there's a lot of other people. I'm not the only person out there. People who've been in the trenches, who've done not only have the educational background, but also have the experience of doing it. And we know what works. We've already done it. We've tried it. We have the experience. We know what the dosages are. We know what works and doesn't work. We know what's going to give you side effects. And if you listen to people who have a lot of experience and have a good teaching way about themselves, it can save you a lot of, mistakes that you're going to make along the way. It's silly to listen to people who have no experience just because they're on TikTok and have a platform that's very popular.
Take a couple more questions. Let's go to Fitness for Life. He asked this last week. I'll get around to it now. Why do a lot of bodybuilders' nipples get so big and point downwards?
I'm not really sure. Is he talking about like gynecomastia? I think he's talking about gynecomastia. When you get glands that are growing under the surface of the nipple, they push the nipple out and then they hang. So it's almost like a woman's breast. What you're basically developing is breast tissue. So you take testosterone, you take Dianabol, whatever the case may be. These drugs aromatize, which means they convert to estrogen, some of them. And then that estrogen will stimulate the glandular tissue that we all have as men and women. And it could make your breast tissue grow. And some people that have, a predisposition for that, they're going to have more glandular stuff going on, and then others. I know guys that didn't get any gyno ever. If those guys were actually women, they'd probably be very flat chested. I took one shot of testosterone and I already had lumps underneath my nipples. Okay, and I had to have it removed. That's when I met Dr. Blau. So it's kind of an individualistic thing, but when you see that, it's because of gynecomastia. It very rarely is it a fat thing. It's usually a glandular thing that's going on under the nipple.
Let's go to Akshay Pandey. Is it normal to yell in sleep? Night terror. I go through this yelling very badly in my sleep for no particular reason to scare my family members. Is it normal? Is there any solution to it? And here's the thing. I don't know if he's actually asking this in terms of from an application of bodybuilding and whatever he may be taking, whatever he may be going through prep-wise or what have you. Is this something you've heard of as even somewhat common in bodybuilding?
Yeah. Most night terrors occur in young kids, and you really don't see it much in adults. But if you look, everyone has gone through stress in their life, okay? And when you go through stress, sometimes it manifests itself while you're sleeping in different crazy dreams. And if it's just happening for a short period of time and it's not all the time, then it's probably due to some circumstance in your life at the moment, and probably acknowledging that and what's going on in your life at the time. Like, let's say you're for instance, you had a tragic loss in your family or something like that. Someone that you loved dearly passed away, and you're waking up in terror, that people are chasing you or whatever. I mean, that's a normal dream to have. I mean, you have anxiety that you might die next, or that something might happen to you because, you never expected something to happen to this other person. And that's, talking to someone about it, whether it be a professional like Leslie Timble, who's a psychotherapist, or even just a good friend or a father or a mother, that a lot of times can release that stress. And now all of a sudden you won't have that happening anymore. To deny it and try to block it and just ignore it usually just leads to more of the same thing. So a lot of times that could be circumstantial. Now, if you have night terrors all the time, no matter what's going on in your life, that's a different story. I have never heard of anyone telling me that. Like I said, for a little bit, usually you see it in kids. Like one of my daughters would wake up in the middle of the night and I don't think she was even awake. I think she was still asleep, but she was talking and crying, and in the morning, she doesn't remember what happened. So that's called kids, have night terrors. But in adults, I think it's more what's going on in your life at the moment.
And that's going to do for this episode of Ask Dave. Again, we remind you, if you haven't already done so, subscribe below, hit the notification. If you like what you're watching, hit the like button, comment below. We have all new episodes. Yesterday was kind of an interesting day, kind of a comical day. Monday, I believe, Greg Valentino put up a video where he had a gripe about Dave and maybe not giving as much coverage to his appearance on Vice TV as he did to Jay Cutler and his appearance on Shark Tank. So he made a video expressing his, I guess, gripe about that. Dave did a response video to that, and then we had some fun with it on After Hours. Both those videos live right now on the RxMuscle YouTube channel, as well as an all-new episode of the all-new show, The Confessional, with Lee Priest and Jimmy the Bull, as well as Sunday night's live episode of Heavy Muscle Radio with Dave Palumbo and Chris Aceto. Tomorrow, all-new episode of the, I guess, rebranded Dave Palumbo podcast.
I think Lee Priest and I are going to have a cage match at the Arnold. I think I'm going to see what they kind of promotion they can give for us. Maybe we
and
can
the winner gets the stolen tips.
Sid's going to be announcing up on the main stage there in the expo hall. Maybe we could Lee and I could erect a big cage around us, and we can have a cage match.
So in between the times that I'm not on the stage doing the interviews or whatever I'm going to be doing there, we could have a cage match, you, Lee Priest, and I'll do the ring introductions.
Actually, I think it should be a tag team. I think it should be Big Lenny and myself versus Lee.
Is he going to be there?
Greg. No, he won't be there.
Probably. No, okay.
If we could arrange it, that would be good. Lee and Greg versus Big Lenny and me. You know, it'd be like the Giants against the Hobbits.
Wait, do we know if Greg is going to be there?
I don't think so. I'm sure if we did it, I'm sure I can get it.
What about Jimmy? I mean, Lee's going to be there, right? Wouldn't this not be the perfect opportunity to get Jimmy at a show?
You would think so. You would think. Maybe we should ask him. I'll ask him. Maybe he'll come.
That'll be fun.
Maybe I'll.
But anyway, like I said, next week we should start our coverage, our preview segments for the Arnold Classic. You know, so far, I guess a lot of the news has been about, I guess, who's not going to be able to make it over here to the United States. Yesterday, it was confirmed that Rubiel Mosquera will not be competing at the Arnold Classic in the USA. However, as Chris Cormier told us, he is trying to get to the Arnold UK. Right. So I think this is a week later or 2 weeks after. But nonetheless, so he's going to be attempting to compete there, and then the plan is for them to be at the New York Pro. So should that happen, you know, at the very least, you're going to have Nick Walker, who confirmed earlier this week. You're going to have Rubiel Mosquera. Tonio Burton has made his intention clear to defend his New York Pro title. That's shaping up to be a very exciting show. So, but again, preview segments begin next week. We'll try to mix in some interviews as well with some of the big players from this upcoming Arnold Classic. Preview segments, and then of course, come Arnold Classic weekend, we'll be covering wall to wall. We'll be following Dave, and we'll see if we can get Chris Aceto to do some laps around the expo as well. So it should be a lot of fun, and as we can, we'll come up with whatever original ideas while we're in Columbus, Ohio. For Dave Palumbo, I'm Sadiq Faruqi. We'll see you next time.
Take care.